I thought I knew what silence sounded like in my father's house. I was wrong. It sounded like a woman, counting down the days until someone finally noticed she was disappearing. My father, Walter, 71, was a retired machinist who'd spent 40 years building things that outlasted him. I'd been overseas for 2 months on a work contract, and every phone call home sounded fine, almost too fine. My stepmother, Renata, always answered for him. Dad's resting, she'd say. Dad just stepped out. I told myself that's just how new marriages work. She's protective. She's adjusting to a grown stepson calling from another state. I landed on a Thursday and drove straight to the house instead of going home first. Some instinct older than reason pulled me there. The porch light was out. The mailbox was stuffed past capacity. Flyers soaked from rain nobody had bothered to bring in. My father opened the door in a bathrobe at 4 in the afternoon. He'd lost weight I could see in his collarbones. His eyes took a second too long to focus on me. Behind him, the house smelled like old coffee and something sour underneath, like laundry left wet too long. He hugged me, but his hands shook against my back. Not the shake of age, the shake of a man holding something in. I want to go lie down, he said in a voice that wasn't his. My father's voice used to fill a room. This one apologized for existing. I sat in his kitchen alone after he went to bed at 4:30, and I started noticing things the way you notice a wrong note in a song you know by heart. A locked cabinet in the hallway that had never been locked in my life. A stack of unopened medical bills, some over 90 days old. A blood pressure monitor with a week of readings that made my stomach drop. On the counter, half hidden under a dish towel, a legal envelope from a title company. I opened it before I could stop myself. A quitclaim deed. My father's signature at the bottom, shaky. Nothing like the confident scrawl I remembered. The property was this house. The house my late mother had helped him buy. The recipient listed was Renata, solely, no conditions. Dated 11 days earlier. 3 days after Dad told me everything was wonderful. Nothing to worry about. I sat there with my hands flat on the table so they wouldn't shake. And I made myself a promise before I had all the facts. Whatever had happened in this house, I was going to find every piece of it. And I wasn't going to let her see me coming. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my old bedroom with the door cracked, listening to the house the way I used to listen for storms as a kid. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway, soft, careful. The kind of walk someone learns when they don't want to be heard. I watched through the gap in the door. Renata, still dressed, not in pajamas, carrying a folder into the room she and my father shared. She stayed in there for 20 minutes with the light on, then came out empty-handed. In the morning, I made breakfast before she woke up. Eggs, toast, the coffee my father actually liked instead of whatever bitter drip I'd seen in the pot. He came out slower than I remembered, one hand on the wall. He ate like a man who hadn't tasted food in days, and something in that broke me quietly, right there at the stove. I asked him gently why the cabinet in the hallway was locked. He went still. Renata organized some things, he said. Financial things. Easier for her to keep track. I asked about the blood pressure readings. He said Renata had been taking him to a new doctor. Closer to home, very attentive, very thorough. I asked what doctor. He couldn't remember the name. When Renata finally came downstairs, her smile arrived a full second before her eyes did. She hugged me like I was a nephew she'd always adored. Not a stepson, she'd been quietly starving of information for 2 months. She said Walter had been under the weather. That's all, some fatigue? Nothing serious. She'd been handling everything so I wouldn't have to worry from so far away. I thanked her. I told her how relieved I was that Dad had someone looking out for him. I watched her relax half an inch, and I hated how easy it was to make her believe I'd already stopped looking. That afternoon, while she took my father to what she called a follow-up appointment, I went back into that hallway cabinet. It wasn't locked. She'd simply never expected anyone to try it twice. Inside, a banker's box. Bank statements showing withdrawals I didn't recognize. Cash pulled in amounts just under $5,000. Spaced out like someone counting on nobody adding them up. A folder from an estate attorney I'd never heard of. Not the one who'd handled my mother's affairs years ago. Inside, a new will, dated 6 weeks earlier. My father's signature at the bottom in that same shaky hand. Under the old will, my father's assets were split between his 2 children. Under this new one, everything went to Renata. I wasn't mentioned. My sister wasn't mentioned. Nobody but her. I sat on the floor of that hallway with the box in my lap and understood. I wasn't looking at neglect anymore. I was looking at a plan, executed slowly on purpose, against a man who trusted the wrong person to hold his hand while he was sick. I photographed every page. Then I put the box back exactly as I'd found it, and I went to sit on the porch and wait for them to come home, practicing a face that gave nothing away. They came back from the appointment around 5. Renata carried a small bag with a pill bottle inside. No pharmacy label, just a handwritten note taped to the side. I asked to see it, casual, like a curious son. She said it was a mild sedative for anxiety, helping Dad sleep through the stress of a new diagnosis. What diagnosis, I asked? She paused a beat too long before saying early-stage dementia. Very manageable, the new doctor was optimistic. I looked at my father. His eyes were tired, not confused. A man who forgets his own name doesn't remember the exact year he taught me to weld. That night I called my sister Priya from the driveway, keeping my voice low. I told her everything. The deed, the will, the pills, the missing money. She was quiet, then said the thing I'd been afraid to say myself. She's isolating him to control him. This isn't confusion. This is a con. We agreed I'd stay another week under the excuse of a delayed work contract, while she started pulling together anything odd from her own calls with Dad over the past 2 months. I spent the next days playing the grateful stepson, bringing Renata coffee, asking about her day, letting her believe the danger had passed through the house and left. Underneath that, I was working. I visited the new estate, attorney's office under the excuse of updating my own paperwork, and learned from a careless receptionist that his practice had only opened 8 months earlier. I drove past the clinic listed faintly on the pill bottle. It was a strip mall unit with blacked-out windows, a sign for a wellness consulting business, not a licensed medical practice. I called the pharmacy chain printed at the bottom of a crumpled receipt from Renata's purse. They had no prescription on file under my father's name, not that month, not ever. Whatever was in that bottle, it wasn't medicine from a real doctor. It was something making my sharp, stubborn father foggy enough to sign whatever was placed in front of him. That night I told Renata I'd handle bedtime, let her rest for once. She thanked me, genuinely relieved, no idea what she'd just agreed to. I didn't give him the dose. 3 evenings later, clear-eyed for the first time since I'd arrived, my father asked me quietly if he'd really signed something about the house. I told him everything. I watched his face move through disbelief, then grief, then something harder settling underneath. The look he used to get right before he fixed something everyone else had given up on. I need you to trust me for a few more days, I told him. And I need you to keep pretending you don't remember any of this. He nodded once, already calculating the angle of the fix. The next morning I called a lawyer, an old friend of my mother's named Frank Ostrowski, who'd handled her estate years ago and still practiced 2 towns over. I told him everything on the phone, standing in the backyard where Renata couldn't hear. He went quiet the way professionals go quiet when they're already building a case in their head. This isn't just fraud, he said. If there's an unlicensed substance involved, this is elder abuse and possibly worse. Get me copies of everything today. I photographed the new will again, clearer this time. I photographed the bank statements, the quitclaim deed, the pill bottle from every angle, even the crumpled pharmacy receipt. Frank told me not to confront her yet. Evidence first, confrontation second, or she disappears. With the money, and we spend years chasing paper instead of getting it back. I asked my father to write down, in his own hand, everything he could remember about the last 2 months. Which days felt foggy, what he'd signed and when, what Renata had told him about me, about Priya, about his own health. He filled 4 pages that afternoon, his handwriting steadying line by line as the fog cleared further from his system, like watching a man walk out of a long fever. One line stopped me cold. She told me you'd stopped calling because you were ashamed of how confused I'd gotten. She told me Priya said the same thing. Renata hadn't just been draining accounts. She'd been rewriting the story of who loved him, brick by brick, so that by the time he had nothing left, he'd believe he had nobody left either. Priya drove down that weekend under the excuse of a birthday visit. Renata greeted her warmly, the same second-late smile, the same rehearsed concern about Dad's memory. Priya played her part perfectly, hugging Renata, thanking her for taking such good care of him, mentioning casually that she'd be staying a few extra days to help out. That night, the three of us sat in my father's workshop, the one room in the house. Renata never entered because the sawdust bothered her allergies, and we laid out the entire plan Frank had built with us over the phone. A meeting with an elder abuse investigator from the county, already scheduled for Monday, a locksmith quietly rekeying the workshop, and a hidden lockbox for the original documents. A new bank account Frank had opened that morning in my father's name alone, requiring 2 signatures for any withdrawal, mine and my father's. My father listened to all of it with his jaw tight. The same expression he used, to wear right before he'd tell a customer. Their quote was final. No negotiation. Whatever happens Monday, he said. I want to be in the room when they read her the charges. I've earned that. Monday came dressed as an ordinary morning. Renata left for what she called a work meeting, though Frank had already confirmed no such job existed anywhere in her employment history. The investigator, a calm woman named Detective Alvarez from the county's Elder Fraud Unit, arrived at 9 with a folder of her own, gathered from weeks of a separate complaint I didn't know existed. It turned out Renata wasn't new to this. Alvarez had a file open on a similar case 2 counties over. An elderly widower, a quitclaim deed, a will rewritten within months of a fast marriage. That had ended just as fast once the paperwork cleared. Same attorney's name on both files. Same wellness clinic address on a prescription bottle in that case, too. My father sat through the whole meeting upright in his good chair, answering every question clearly, describing the fog he'd lived in for weeks, like a man finally allowed to say the word out loud. Alvarez told us the pills had likely contained a sedative, not approved for the dosage or use. They'd been given, enough to blur memory and judgment, without triggering obvious red flags to someone not looking closely. That afternoon, Frank filed an emergency petition freezing every account Renata had touched, and a formal report went to the county alongside Alvarez's existing file. The wheels she'd built to move quietly were now moving against her. Renata came home around 6, tired, unaware, already rehearsing whatever gentle lie she'd planned for dinner. She found my father, Priya, and me sitting at the kitchen table with Frank on speakerphone, and Detective Alvarez's card sitting in the center of the table like a closed door. Her face did the thing I'd been waiting 2 months to see, the mask slipping half an inch before she caught it and forced the concern back into her eyes. Walter, honey, what's going on? My father looked at her for a long moment, the machinist's stillness before the final cut. I know about the will, he said. I know about the deed. I know what was in the bottle. She started talking fast then, about stress, about doctors, about how she'd only ever wanted to help, and I watched my father listen to every word without his face moving once. A man who'd already welded the joint and was only waiting for the seam to cool. Priya slid a folder across the table. Copies of the withdrawal, history, and the clinic's health. Department records showing no license to prescribe anything to anyone. Renata looked at the folder, then at Frank's voice on the phone calmly, explaining the freeze order already, filed with the court, and something in her finally understood the difference between an old man alone and an old man surrounded. She reached for her purse like she might simply leave, and my father, in a voice I hadn't heard since I was a boy who'd broken something expensive, said one sentence that ended the conversation. Sit down. This isn't your house anymore, and it never legally was. Renata didn't sit. She stood by the door a moment, weighing an old man's stillness against a room full of paper that could put her in front of a judge. Then she left without a word, taking only her purse, and none of us stopped her, because Frank had already confirmed the freeze order. Meant she couldn't touch a single account no matter where she drove. She was arrested 11 days later at a motel 2 states over, running the same routine on another family, a fresh quitclaim deed already drawn up in a folder in her car. That detail broke something loose in my father. The realization he hadn't been a random target. He'd been a rehearsed one, a role she'd played before and would have played again, if Monday had gone differently. The case moved fast, helped by Detective Alvarez's earlier file and by my father's own handwritten pages, dated and detailed, proof he'd noticed the fog even while lost inside it. The fake will was thrown out. The deed was reversed, the house restored to my father's name. The drained accounts partly recovered once the bank traced the transfers. Renata pled guilty. Financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery. Administering a controlled substance without a license. She's serving 4 years, with restitution owed long after she's out. My father didn't bounce back overnight. He flinched at paperwork for months. Started asking Priya and me to review anything before he signed it. Not from lost confidence, but a new understanding that trust needs a second pair of eyes sometimes. He went back to his workshop that spring. I found him sanding an old table for Priya's new apartment one Saturday. Radio low, coffee going cold. Exactly the way I remembered him before any of this started. He looked up and said the only thing he ever said that sounded like closure. I built things for 40 years that people trusted with their weight. I just forgot for a while that trust goes both ways. I think about that Thursday drive more than I'd like to. How close I came to going home first, unpacking, sleeping, and losing another day he might not have had left to lose. If someone in your life has an elderly parent suddenly controlled by one, person who manages their news, their doctors, their paperwork, don't wait for the feeling to pass. Show up. Ask the hard questions. Trust your gut before the fog gets deeper. Thanks for watching till the end. If this story hit you the way it hit us to tell it, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. More stories just like this one are waiting for you right here on the Revenge Hub.